autistic son. This is him every time. Imagine just hearing this noise nonstop. Bro.
I want to do a video series for my YouTube channel talking about mental illness in the black community and black fatigue with mental illness, because as somebody who's misdiagnosed with autism like myself and has mental health issues due to domestic violence and child abuse and unprocessed trauma and other things like that, I can definitely, speak on a lot of experiences just to give a side of what, people deal with as far as mental health issues in the black community and racism and other things like that. I'm gonna get my light here. But in this video, what happens is that, a father is recording his two children. So what happens is that the autistic kid is having an episode where he's just screaming and yelling. And the little kid is walking, and his little younger brother's walking by and saying shush. And then the younger brother pulls the older brother out of the chair and wrestles him to the ground and says, hey, I said shut up. And some people watched the video many times, and then they said, oh, well, the autistic kid is saying stop it and whatever. And the father's just recording this on a camera as it's happening. So I think that there's different sides to this. It could be the father allowing his autistic kid to be bullied for two reasons. Either because he wishes he can do the same, but he can't because it's child abuse. So he doesn't mind the younger brother doing this. And it could also be a video about he's just saying, this is what my life is. This is my autistic kid, and his difficulties is a detriment because you see how it's hard for me, but hard for my other child as well, really. So I do want to say that, if I had any magic power, I would just make sure everybody was born without a mental illness or whatever, if that was doable. Somebody has mental illness, they don't have it anymore because obviously, it is hard to manage. And it's also really hard because there's a lot of things that happen to people when they have a mental illness. There's a lot of taking advantage of. There are times when family treats you like shit, really. And then also, too, for families, it's difficult as well because it's a financial drain. And also, it's just hard. You have to have a lot of patience to deal with. When we have sex and we create a child, we have to understand that we could get Michael Jackson, we can get Albert Einstein, we can get, a go-getter and somebody that can make us a lot of money like Mr. Beast, or we can get, a sociopath, we can get a person with a disability who is a good person, good heart, but high maintenance. That's the probability of procreation. But I do think that I agree with a lot of people in this video that obviously the father needs parenting skills because obviously his youngest son is bullying the kid with autism. And on one side, I can understand where the father and the little brother's coming from because I do work in a hospital. So I remember, a few weeks ago, there was this guy who had a mental illness and he was screaming all night And then what happened was the nurses told him to knock it out. And he was like, ha, 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 it's hilarious. And he's he had to be in his 50s or 60s, really. And then he got moved to another hospital because there's 4 hospitals where I live. And what they do to him is each time he goes, in the middle of the night, they grabbed him. What they do is to get police officers, they sedate him, and then he goes out because nobody wants to hear that shit. And then also, too, that even though he's somebody maybe in his, in his 70s or whatever, he's an older person really like that. I can understand and I can agree with dosing him because it's almost how does other people sleep? How do people who have injuries or surgical injuries, how do people sleep for their mental health issues if you have a person who has a disability and they're screaming all night, really? And then they also understand that, being disruptive is funny the same way pranking somebody in the middle of the night is disruptive. So sometimes I can understand that perspective of a person living with a person with a disability and in two situations where the disabled person knows what they're doing and then also if they don't know what they're doing. And I, like I said, I worked in the psychiatric ward. So I've dealt with kids who use racial slurs. I dealt with kids who like to pick fights. I've dealt with kids who who just come from difficult home lives. They'll be like, oh, well, this thing happened to me, that thing happens to me. I aspire to be a porn star or whatever. And they're talking to adults like that. So I do meet people who fall into mental health categories. And then also, too, I know what it's like to have a relative with mental health issues. Like both me and one of my brothers has antisocial disorder. So I know what it's like to deal with, his, antisocial behavior. He knows what it's like to deal with me with my antisocial behavior. And there are times when, it is something where it's not that he doesn't know better, it's that he chooses not to do better. Like, if I want to sleep or something like that, he's always going to be waking me up. And if I need a shower, he's always going to walk to the bathroom and take a shit or whatever. Or I know one day I was showering, I was naked. He actually walked into the bathroom to hang up his towel. Like, he almost has this brain set of my rules, my structure. I do everything. So I remember like one time he wanted to use the bathroom. So I was like taking a shit really. And what happened was he unlocked the bathroom door to use the bathroom. Is like, oh my God, really? And I was like, it's getting to a point where it's almost like, I have no privacy because he's almost like, if he needs to use the bathroom for whatever reason I'm in there, he's going to unlock the door to go in there, and he'll say something like, you have a penis, I have a penis, grow up really. So I know what it's like to have that frustration of a mentally ill relative and one who does know better and doesn't know how to respect boundaries, and ones that doesn't know better and doesn't know that they should be respecting boundaries. So, I get both sides of it. And I also understand, like, how frustrating it is, Like, I remember, like, taking a train, like, a year ago from, New York City to Connecticut. And there was, like, this family. And there was this kid that was screaming and yelling because he had autism, whatever. And I remember his dad, like, getting mad and tossing him against, into one of the seats really, because, this kid was always fighting and everybody's like had their eyes on them really. So it's definitely hard. And also too, when you are a sibling, you're going to hear the parents curse and the frustration. You're going to know that you're not going to get any sleep. You're going to know that you may have to babysit. You're going to have to know that maybe the parents can spank or be rough with the autistic kid, but you can't do that as well really. And also that, maybe people will be like, oh, well, maybe you're a retard because you have a brother that's a retard type of thing, really. So I can understand the frustration side of it. I can understand, a kid, being 6 or 7 years old, not knowing that their older brother has a disability and how to manage it because there's no parental intervention and all that. But you got to teach, all people that if you have relatives with a disability, that they deserve respect. They deserve to be understood, really, and they have to deserve, and they also have to understand that when you have relatives like that, you treat them humanely. You don't treat them inhumanely, because a lot of people's grandparents have physical issues and mental health issues, so it's the same exact thing as treating a grandparent poorly. The next thing is that, and I think I do want to talk about the other side of inhumaneness that. And I'll touch on a little bit, but yes, even though I can understand the frustrations, it's mostly a bad video because first of all, you should not have a child that thinks it's okay to rough up their older brother or another sibling because they have a disability. Because, that teaches, okay, we solve issues with violence, and we also teach taking advantage because, sometimes if a parent sees a child kick a dog, the dog's never going to call, the ASPCA or whatever, really. So, it's one of those things, too, where, and this is the same thing with disabled people. There's some disabled people who can't defend themselves or stand up for themselves or advocate themselves or say what's going on, really. So they get kicked and punched and smacked around by relatives. It's almost like, it's open season, really, because they can't defend themselves. And unfortunately, that could lead to other things. Sometimes, you have girls who are disabled, and then maybe they're annoying as kids, and then they go through abuse, and then maybe when they're of puberty and they're attractive, like Jillian from Family Guy, there could be relatives taking advantage of them. There could be people in the community. There could be siblings or other people because you create that cycle of, you're annoying, you're loud, I'm going to hit you, I'm going to just not tolerate it. So what we teach our children on how to deal with other relatives is important. And I think the last things I want to talk about some personal stories that I had an issue of startling. And the problem was that, startling came from two things. That number one, I was misdiagnosed with autism. So my parents kind of thought that it's part of an autistic quirk. So sometimes what my dad would do is that he would sneak up and poke me from behind, or he would bang a table, or sometimes I remember when I was on the phone, and I'll talk about another video. I was talking to my I was talking to my girlfriend in high school that I was going through depression, thought about taking my life. And when I walked away, my dad was popping up from around. He did a Jack in the Box where he jumped out from the corner and be like, you know what, you want to take your own life? I'm gonna beat the fucking shit out of you if you ever think about doing that. But he was almost putting on a spectacle, you're the kid, I'm the father. I can pop out of nowhere. I can do whatever. I remember one time my dad was working on the house really, so he was ultimately peering in my bedroom on a 20-foot ladder and whatever, just being like, you know what, I'm dad. I can see whatever you're doing or something like that. I'm always there really. So it's kind of startling when you're working on a video project and you see your dad really on the window, looking at you for a while and being creepy just to watch you jump really. And I remember how my younger brother, when I was in college and I came home, he would jump, he would startle me too. Sometimes when I was sleeping, he would tackle me, or sometimes he'd try to kiss me while I'm sleeping. And I remember one time I threw him across the room because I was having a dream or a nightmare, and I got yelled at for not being able to, control myself while I'm sleeping, which is stupid. Another time, I was trying to go down the stairs, my brother was jumping out, jumping, trying to startle me so I'd fall backwards down the stairs. Or sometimes it just turned to a thing where my dad had to intervene really. But there was a while where he was just popping out of nowhere trying to startle people, and other shit like that. So it was an example of my brother learned to startle me, and he also learned to startle me because my dad would do that. But it's almost like if you have a kid with autism or a mental health issue and they have they're thinking being startled easily or whatever, what example are you setting by engaging that behavior? Another thing that happened was that I remember in high school, my dad put me on Risperidol because I was misbehaving in high school. And I remember there were rules in high school, you have to have a certain amount of food. It's not enough, like a banana's not enough really. I remember going through depression, and I remember how one time my brother was like, it's not enough, Byron, it's not enough. And my dad punched the table and saying you need to mind your own business, Jordan, you don't know what the fuck is going on really. And my little brother was kind of crying because he didn't understand what it meant. I also remember one time that I took a Flintstone gummy, or a Flintstone tablet, and it was actually for my younger brother because I just the taste of those. I also wanted to get the nutrients from it. But I remember my little brother raising his voice at me. Then when my dad came home, my dad was talking to him and being you know what, there's different medication for people. That's not Byron's medication. There's other medication for him. And I also and again, you don't want me telling a 3 or 4 year old about a person who's in high school and their medication really, because it's the exact same thing if I decided to talk about my grandmother's medication, or I believe that my father went to therapy at one point, or he had took medication for a while because my father had some issues as well really. So it's almost what would happen if I was telling my younger brother that shit. It's the same thing about respect. And I remember another time that my brother, one time my dad wanted me to get my medication. So one time he gave my little brother a pill to give to me. And it's almost a little stupid, because almost it would be the exact same thing if you had a daughter and she needed a tampon, and then you had the little brother carry a cotton tampon that she's gonna bring to the bathroom and put inside her vagina really. But also again, you're having a 5 or 6 year old pick up a pill and give it to somebody else really. So now he knows about people's medication. Now he's actually holding a medication that could hurt him if he consumes it. But it kind of goes down to maybe my dad was frustrated with my behavior, but one of the ways he dealt with that was by humiliating me, by saying, okay, well, everybody, my son has a mental illness, or hey, younger brother or youngest kid, your oldest brother has a mental illness, we'll talk about it. Or I want to say this is humiliating to have to go to school and have meetings about your behavior and other things like that. So I'm going to humiliate you by talking about personal stuff or talking about medication and other issues. or even have your younger brother feel your medication just to humiliate you, when that's completely, bad parenting and dangerous parenting because you're having a young kid touch medication. The other thing is really just that, really. I have other stories about domestic violence or other types of mental health things I went through, but ultimately, yes, children can be really difficult. It can be very frustrating to have children, and children with disabilities. But that's why we have to understand, when you procreate, there's always a probability you're going to have a kid with a disability. The other thing too is that is that as well, that it is frustrating, but it's how you manage it. And one way not to manage it is by having children bully children with disabilities, because it creates a cycle of because you're frustrated, I can do whatever I want to do it to you. And then also, oh well, since I can get away with it because you can't stand up for yourself, i'm going to um I'm going to allow other kids to do that, or I'm going to allow my other children to do that, because a children bullying another child is not abuse. It's not child abuse, because it's not coming from the parent, but it's a way of bullying and getting licks, and because the parent can't do that, because then it becomes child abuse, and that's not right. So, all children need to be treated humanely. All children need to be prepared for the world. All children need to be prepared on how to deal with difficulties, such as children with mental health issues that may be frustrating to deal with.